Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God
Okay, well, we're back in business, ladies and gentlemen. RJ Heyman is in the country, and we suffered through an episode with Aaron Zimmerman, but I'm not sure we ever want to do that again.
God help you. I'm so sorry.
No, it was wonderful. We love you, Aaron. How have your travels been?
They were great. Yeah, they were just really great time with the family. We spent 10 days in Costa Rica, which was incredible as a whole family. And then I took my two older boys to Europe for a bit for a Dutch family reunion, which was really fun. On Father's Day, there were about 60 members of our family, both Dutch and American, in a restaurant that my grandfather founded in the 1930s.
What?
And so it was really cool. It was very, very fun. And I think my boys were pretty overwhelmed. They kind of, my oldest son, Jackson, looked around and said, I never realized that only like 1/5 of our family is in America. So just so cool for him to connect with, cousins his age and really a lot of people he'd never met before. So it was a very memorable experience. And yeah, we had a great time.
That's awesome. Can I ask an ignorant question?
Are there any other types of questions that you ask, Sarah?
Exactly. Do they speak English? Like were your boy, so all your family's able to, okay.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Okay.
I mean, people at my dad's generation, their English is pretty good, but their kids and their grandkids, their English is pretty much perfect. Because if you're in Holland, it's such a small country, they all speak like 3 or 4 languages fluently. So communication was not a problem.
I see. Sarah, how about you? How's the last couple weeks been?
I mean, I'm embarrassed to talk about it just because it's been so luxurious. I mean, we were in rural Tennessee in the mountains, and there's nothing to do there. And yeah, I mean, there's a Piggly Wiggly. We went there. I saw people I'm probably related to. It's basically the same thing RJ did. I mean, it was like really nice.
I mean, the other day I sent you that study I sent you of like the states that exercise the least in the country.
Yeah.
Colorado was number 1. Last on the list was Mississippi.
Yeah. And I bet Tennessee was like in the bottom 5. Yeah. It's, we've gone to Tennessee for 3 years now for my husband to get this degree. And this is definitely the last year I had in me. So we all bought t-shirts at the Piggly Wiggly as like a commemorative goodbye. We've done Swanee. So
I see.
Isn't it kind of also like, I hear people talk about it like it's heaven on earth though too, like when you get up on the mountain and you go through the gates and isn't there some tradition where you sort of like kiss your way in and kiss your way out or something like that because you're entering, through the pearly gates into the closest thing on earth to heaven?
They got a lot of traditions. They're like, they got a lot of stuff they do up there.
Careful,
I know.
Sarah.
She's holding back.
It's a lot of Episcopalians. I'll just say
back.
it's a lot of Episcopalians. I'm just, I'm just the kind of person that like when I see a really like beautiful outdoor setting, I want to get out of my car and I want to take a picture of it, and then I want to get back in my car and go find people. Like that's my vibe. You know what I mean? So it's just like it's just a lot of outdoors time. And I've got little kids. I mean, I get people go up there and they do this whole like contemplative thing. And there's a lot of icons or whatever, and that's cool. But like, my 4-year-old and 7-year-old are like not down for that for more than about 30 seconds. So yeah, it was.
They don't meditate.
No, not yet.
So
I mean, we're
practice mindfulness.
We're working on it, but not yet.
Well, I too was in Tennessee, but I was in Memphis. And I went to...
I saw you on Facebook.
I know, I went to Graceland. It's been a pretty eventful couple of weeks. I'm on Facebook now, which is a whole nother story for another time. But
it means you're washed. You're officially washed now that you're back on Facebook.
I'm totally washed.
Which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, it was not with small amounts of trepidation that I pressed click, recover account. That was a dark moment. But it actually, it's funny we mentioned this because the first piece we're going to talk about today is all about Bo Burnham, who is a comedian, and he really was one of the first YouTube stars, I guess, and it completely dates me because I missed out on all of this stuff. But the New Yorker did a profile on him because he's 27 years old and he's written and directed a movie called Eighth Grade, which is, giving us all, re-traumatizing everyone who's watching this trailer. But it looks unbelievably good. And it comes out, I think, July 13th. But what struck me was the sound bites coming out of this guy's mouth and the wisdom, in fact. This is in the New Yorker. It's called Bo Burnham's Age of Anxiety, written by Michael Schulman. Bo Burnham, a 27-year-old comedian who made it big in the early days of YouTube, has since pursued a successful career in stand-up. Burnham is regularly afflicted by anxiety and panic attacks. And in his new movie, Eighth Grade, he gives voice to this anxiety in the form of a 13-year-old girl named Kayla. Apparently, he watched hundreds of teen vlogs, video vlogs. The girls tended to talk about their souls and the boys about Minecraft. So he made his protagonist a girl. I thought that was a great little throwaway. It goes on to describe, he meets with these very vulnerable eighth graders. Even the words bring up certain emotions for many of us. But it really stopped me in my tracks when they got to him describing one of his comedy acts. He sort of asks rhetorically, what's the show about? It's about performing. I try to make my show about other things, but it always ends up becoming about performing. Social media, it's just the market's answer to a generation that demands to perform. So the market said, here, perform everything to each other all the time and for no reason. It's prison. It is horrific. He tells his audience, if you can live your life without an audience, you should do it and then quit, sort of stand up for a couple of years. Goes on to say, I think there are probably certain elements about social media that we'll look back on the way we look back on smoking, where we'd be like, maybe we shouldn't have all been doing that. The equivalent of my doctor smoked will be my shrink had a Twitter. There's a lot more to it, but what I would love to hear from you guys both.
Or my priest.
My priest
had a
Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys about your own eighth grade experiences as well as your thoughts on that.
I was watching the film trailer. Like, we don't give a lot of trigger warnings on Mockingbird, but trigger warning, you will flash back to eighth grade and it's not going to be a good look. But I actually read it's a pretty long piece. I read the whole thing. It's fantastic. One thing he wrote that stayed with me was like, I'm always trying to appeal to the people who hated me up until then. Like when he talks about doing, writing new things. I mean, which is, probably the definition of most eighth graders, but also still the definition of most 35-year-olds. I thought it was pretty brilliant. I'm excited to see the movie. Yeah, but I definitely watched it, and all I could think about was how we did Hello, Dolly in our musical theater department. And I was what's it called when you're like you're the second, gosh, I should know this, the backup person?
Understudy?
I was the understudy for cook number 2. And she got sick. And which game on, right? And so I was in this, like, I think I was supposed to be like a German cook or something, which is still my role in life. And I like covered myself in flour and wore like bright red lipstick. And I remember the completely insane theater teacher was like, you stole the show. And like, I totally believed her. Like, it's just such a painful, I mean, I don't know who has a good 8th grade year. I feel like it's just something you get through. But I loved all the conversations he has with real 8th graders in this piece and the stuff that they're worried about versus the stuff that we think that we should be worried about on their behalves, or we think that they're worried about. I mean, I was fascinated because I'm terrified of social media for 8th graders. And it's like the question, I mean, we have a friend in town right now and he is an 8th grader, and the 8th grader just got a phone. And so we talked about it like as worried parents for 45 minutes. But really the 8th graders are terrified of being shot in their schools, which is like, not, I mean, that seems obvious now that I hear it said out loud, but it's a pretty powerful piece from a lot of angles.
Yeah, I did not have a great 8th grade year. I had a unique 8th grade experience because I think I've shared this with everyone before, that I went to this strange little school in New York City called the St. Thomas Choir School, which is a boarding school for boys only, 5th to 8th grade, that provided choristers to St. Thomas Fifth Avenue. So I think there were 10 people in my 8th grade class. They were all boys. Yeah, pretty crazy. Social media was not a big thing in 1989 to 90.
You old, RJ.
I know, I'm so old. Freshman year was probably harder because I had to figure out how to relate to women again, because I hadn't gone to school or really been around any women for like 4 years. And that was a rude awakening. That was kind of strange. But I actually found the trailer for the movie to be comforting in a way, because we have an 8th grader. Like Spencer, our middle child, is going to be an 8th grader next year. And he is totally addicted to screens. I don't think he's addicted to social media. I think he watches, it's not Minecraft anymore. It's Fortnite, as you may know, like every teenage boy. Actually, when we went to Holland, he talked with his cousins about Fortnite, in Holland, who also play. And hopefully they'll hook up online sometime and play Fortnite together. But he would play Fortnite every waking hour of every day if he could. And when I go upstairs to his little video game area when he's up there, he's usually playing Fortnite, and then on his phone is a video of someone else playing Fortnite, and then there's on his iPad like some sitcom playing, usually like Parks and Rec or Arrested Development or something like that. So he's triple screens, and he's also talking to his friends while they're playing Fortnite together. And my wife and I have just been talking, like, what do we do about this? How do we put limits on this? How do we think about this? And he said something really sweet maybe a month ago or 6 weeks. I can't remember when it was exactly, but something along the lines of, can you just give me a little bit of space? I'll get through this, but I kind of need this right now to make it through this part of my life. And I thought that was sort of affecting and wise and vulnerable. And I still think he spends way too much time on his screens. And actually, when we were on our trip, I inadvertently jumped into a body of water with his phone in my back pocket, which I did not mean to do. But that was a wonderful week. When he didn't have access to his phone, he was much more engaged with us. But the reason I found it comforting was because it was a reminder that it is actually going to be okay. There were things that wounded me in my middle school experience. There are things that are going to wound him in his middle school experience and his high school experience and his college and the rest of his life, right? But that it is actually going to be okay. And part of it is just running the gauntlet of adolescence and growing up. And it looks different now than it did when I was growing up. Maybe it's worse. I don't know. There was a Dig video I saw, sort of a parody video going back to the 16th century with, parents complaining about how easy, their kids have it. I feel like parents have always been worried about their children. I mean, my father's father told him, don't read so many books, it'll make you want things, and it did. It made him want to go to business school and move out of Holland and move to America. But his father had like a 5th grade level education and did just fine. So for his, books were the Twitter or the Snapchat of my father's childhood. But again, I found it comforting. Like, he's going to make it through. It's going to be hard. It's going to be wonderful. But it's something everyone has to go through. No one gets through middle school unscathed.
I mean, this Bo seems to have untold amounts of compassion or empathy.
Yes.
Say actual genuine.
He sounded like Mr. Rogers almost a little bit, which I finally saw that movie this week.
Well,
I mean, not exactly, but kind of.
I mean, he does. They say that, like, when he meets with those 8th graders, Sarah, I mean, like, he asks them what words come to mind when they think of to describe 8th grade in a single word, and the answers included underwhelming, overwhelming, stressful, responsibility, and headache. And then they talk to a boy who is a competitive gamer, and he says, a lot of people just see me as this happy, loving kid, but I don't show anyone my other side because I don't want them to be worried about me, he said softly.
Oh.
So when I'm alone, I'm being my other self. Then Vernon leans forward and tells him, I'm sorry you feel that way. It is not unique. I felt that way when I was a kid. I feel that way now. And, early on, I don't know if you guys caught the aside towards the beginning, that for him, it was between being a comedian and going into the clergy.
Pastor.
Being a pastor.
Yeah, amazing.
So which makes it sound like he's not a Catholic, even though he's from Massachusetts. But I thought to myself, a lot of sort of what stand-up comedy is becoming is preaching. Right now, we're working on a list for the new issue of the Mockingbird, and we're calling it like Pagan Priests of Mockingbird as a way of sort of talking about all the thinkers and talking heads from whom we've gotten so much over the years, but who would never in a million years consider themselves Christian. And you have to include a bunch of comedians in that list because They seem to be talking about stuff that matters. And here's Bo Burnham doing the same thing. I mean, there's another exchange in there. Did you guys see the thing about they talked to his mother and they sort of trying to figure out what accounts for his insight or his rise? And she, Patty is her name. She says, he was just a good kid. And Burnham corrected her. He said, I was terrified of being not good. And then she asks, why were you so hard on yourself? I wonder. Burnham replies, half joking, it was you telling me I was the best, smartest thing that ever lived. And then I needed that validation from the entire world going forward. That's probably a pretty classic thing with people of my generation. I mean, that's what we call the law. And it's one of these things where even an evaluation, even if it's a really positive evaluation, can serve as a total condemnation. And I don't know, I saw the trailer and I just thought, man, this thing is like a cannonball of empathy headed straight for the screen.
His mom is also a hospice nurse. Did you see that? She was featured in the This American Life episode that was about, what was it called, Death and Taxes, and I remember that episode, and she is so profoundly insightful and knows what matters because she spent her entire career around people who are dying and families who are dealing with that. And it has to come some from that, I would think.
It's so interesting to me because there's these different life stages that we give a lot of grace to. Like I think about when you have a newborn, there's a lot of grace given to the to young parents and newborns. But I don't think we think about children that way. I don't think, for those of us who aren't working with kids, we're not thinking about kids that way. And RJ, I love the story of your son because I would be, too many screens and he's always in front of the screens and blah, blah, blah. And then when I think back to what I did in 8th grade, it was very much I just need to get through this age. It was me, a boombox, the soundtrack to Romeo and Juliet with Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio, and just weeping. You know what I mean? Just crying for
just Radiohead for days.
Exactly.
Just so much Radiohead.
And so I don't know. I think we would do right to remember that that's that. We look at somebody who's young and everything's great. It's it's a really we would do well to give them some space. So anyway, we should all see this movie.
There's one other thing I wanted to mention, which I thought was incredible when they ask him what is his thematic consistency, and he says, I don't try to worry too much about being thematically consistent. I don't think our days are thematically consistent. I might have a scary morning and then a funny afternoon and then a depressing night, probably in that order. I think he's saying this at some Silicon Valley thing, and someone immediately tweets it and says, preach, my guy.
There's such power in vulnerability and sort of truth-telling and compassion, And I'll also say, Dave, as both you and I, as former youth workers, I used to love working with middle schoolers because I felt like they were, I don't know, a little more transparent maybe than high schoolers. And they definitely had some awkwardness to them, but they weren't sort of curating their own existences in quite the same way. And all they really wanted was for you to treat them like a human being, and be somewhat interested in the things that they were interested in. And I just, as you were reading back what those 8th graders were saying, it just reminded me of working with middle schoolers and actually how wonderful that was, how fun that was.
Actually, getting back on Facebook, the number one thing that's actually been kind of cool is to see where the 8th grade boys that I worked with, they're all, they're getting married at this point, what they're up to. And they're, it's pretty cool. But, while we're on the subject of vulnerability, the next thing that was published this week that looked very interesting was by a writer named Chris Beam in the New York Times. She wrote an editorial called, I Did a Terrible Thing. How Can I Apologize? She talks about sort of abandoning her loved one right after a terminal diagnosis. And she talks about the Jewish process of apology, teshuva, which requires that the ones seeking forgiveness first undergo a personal inventory or reckoning. In Hebrew, teshuva means return and sort of trying to reconcile with her ex. Maybe I thought this was a universal longing to be listened to rather than apologized at. But it gets really interesting when she sort of talks about the larger culture. She says, our culture is good at promises. Our leaders take oaths. We say, I do. And we're good at applying punishments when those promises are broken. But where's the space for real remorse and introspection? We live in a Christian nation. Resist all you want, but 3/4 of us identify as Christian. That's the New York Times speaking, by the way. And I wonder whether that foists a redemption frame on our apologies. We look to be absolved, forgiven immediately, the way we look to God. But people are not gods. And I wonder, in this era of facile press release apologies, whether we need to slow things down. Of course, apologizing for committing a crime is different from apologizing for breaking someone's heart, but there is some crossover. Are you guys good at apologizing?
I mean, probably no one's good at apologizing. It's something I work on a lot and I think about a lot. I've just started listening to Esther Perel's podcast, which I'm a few seasons behind, Where Shall We Begin, which is like couples counseling. And I can I can say like, oh, I'm listening to it because then I'm like a pastor and I work with like lots of couples. That's not true. I'm listening to it because I'm married. And I'm fascinated by sort of how these couples interact. It's also incredibly normalizing. You're like, oh, other people are dealing with this stuff. But she models a thing, an apology that my own therapist talks about a lot, which is like, and I think I've said it on here before recently, but it is this sort of like not just an apology, but also like, how did that make you feel? Like, how did I make you feel when I did that? And how important that question is, because I think so often, we want to apologize and then immediately sort of move on. And there's an interesting, I should have an article pulled up about this before I talk about it because people won't like this, but there's some interesting research about when men and women fight. Have you guys seen this before, where women's bodies literally like process it in a more heightened way? And so it takes longer for our pulse to come down. And so even though it'll feel like we're done, I don't know if you've had this experience with your wives, you should stay silent, but like, it'll feel like you're done. And then your wife will be like, and then I'm like, I do this all the time when Josh and I fight, and he's always like, wait a second, I thought we were done, like completely disoriented. But because my body is still in fight mode, I'm trying to justify that like mentally and verbally. And so anyway, that's not really the question Dave asked, but I think I'm fascinated by this idea of like, what does apology mean? What does forgiveness mean? When I was very seriously dating a Jewish man in college, I considered conversion to Judaism, and I actually learned about this principle of forgiveness and practiced it with someone that I had really hurt. And it was remarkable, although I will say it reminds me a lot of what you do in AA, right? It's a lot of the same, like actually coming to that person in a way to say like, how can I heal what I've done? Like, I'm not just going to say I'm sorry and dump you.
I do think he's right about wanting to be heard. That when I think about people that have hurt me, basically what I really want is for them to sit down and to listen to what I have to say and to feel, and not even just to hear it, but to actually feel my feelings, to actually be empathetic with me. And that's been a big thing in our, marriage as well. Our little phrase is, can I take your tour, or will you take my tour? Basically, will you sit there and allow me to be a tour guide of my own, how I feel right now, not in an attacking way, hopefully, although as you guys know, because you're married, that's hard sometimes not to do the attacking and blame thing. But if you could just actually say, when this happened, I felt sad or threatened or confused or hurt or angry or whatever it is. And then as the hearer, to actually put yourself in that person's shoes and not allow it to become threatening to you, there's incredible power in that. And you do kind of find that it may not completely your negative emotions may not completely disappear, but they begin to melt away. And more than that, it really creates intimacy. If you can put yourself in your spouse's shoes or in anyone's shoes, that you're trying to work a conflict out with. So I think that she's right, that forgiveness becomes a little bit too, too facile, too easy sometimes. I hate to say that because it's, true forgiveness is never easy. But when the time isn't taken, the hurt may not exactly go away. I thought it was incredibly courageous of her to write it as well, because it sounds like she was really pretty awful. And to recognize that and own that.
We talked a couple of, I think like last year or something, about Harriet Lerner's new book, Why Won't You Apologize? And Lerner always says that a fine way to ruin an apology is to view your apology as an automatic ticket to forgiveness and redemption. That is, it's all really about you and your own need for reassurance. And I'm sorry, when it's like effective or genuine, however you want to say, it's not a bargaining chip that you give to get something back from an injured party. And, we kind of know this, but we also love forgiveness, and we want to be let off the hook, and we want to be absolved is really what we're looking for. But this is me talking, tacking on a plea, no matter how heartfelt, I think it does mix the message. Like, you embed this condition, and anytime there's a condition embedded, it tends to, incite more resentment rather than relieve it. So I always think about Christ's injunction to forgive your enemies, and just how it just nails us all to the wall, because real forgiveness that or real apology that's not looking for forgiveness, but is really just genuinely expressing remorse. It's so difficult to come by it's so difficult for it not to use it as a bargaining chip, even subconsciously. I mean, I think we're colossally resistant to reconciliation, especially with the people we love the most. And I mean, the only cry for me as a Christian would be sort of like, have mercy on me. I can't forgive the right way. I can't apologize the right way. I know I need to. But one of the things I really loved about this article is that I think at the end she talks about there's like a liturgy we're developing about how a person apologizes and is forgiven in the public sphere. And it's become way too detached from how it works in the private sphere and on intimate levels, like what you were just talking about, RJ. And that if we're to regain any sense of contrition that goes beyond, a press secretary's kind of idea, that we've got to go back, as we always do in everything, is to go back is how does it actually function in your own life? I mean, that's where I'm at. I always think that it's no wonder in the Sermon on the Mount that you have Jesus not just talking about sex and about greed and anger, but you have him talking about worry and you have him talking about apologies. Because those are like, that is, if that doesn't convict you, then you've got a heart of stone, or you're just not someone that I certainly would ever want to hang out with.
And I'll just say two more things about this. I think my biggest struggle is, how do I forgive someone who I know will never tell me they're sorry? So someone who will never, own up to what they did or ask for forgiveness or even be willing to talk about it. And how do I, not that I have so many people like that in my life, but how do you actually forgive someone who's not going to ask for it? That's tough.
It is. Sarah, do you got anything else to say about forgiveness, apologies?
I keep thinking about this book that came out last year. I don't think we talked about it, called South of Forgiveness, I think is what it's called. I'm hoping I'm getting that right. It's the book about this man and a woman who they did a TED Talk together called Our Story of Rape and Reconciliation. And it's this guy that raped this woman, and they come together years afterwards and navigate what that looks like, what forgiveness looks like, what him knowing the pain he's put her through looks like. It's incredibly powerful and also incredibly impossible. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's amazing that they did that. However, that's not something, I think that is totally of God. I'm not sure that we're all capable of that. So anyway, it makes me think of these impossible forgiveness situations that we encounter. And, RJ, I think your question about how do we forgive someone who hasn't said that they're sorry is an important one. And I think that's actually a question a lot of adult children probably struggle with. I mean, that's definitely something I've seen in ministry.
Absolutely.
And, I think the very first talk I gave for Mockingbird at St. Thomas in Houston, I talked about how I had a therapist that said that they would be out of business if parents of adult children just learned to say, I'm sorry. So it's like, just say I'm sorry.
Boy.
So anyway.
Well, it's definitely the air we breathe right now. I keep thinking about hoops people have to jump through to be forgiven, even in the Christian circles. And now everyone is saying, like, there's one thing if it's just two people are at the same station, but if there's a power differential, then completely different rules apply. And you want to say, I think it becomes almost more impossible, if anything, and you have to acknowledge these power differentials. But then if you want to get into the law, of Jesus forgiving, like Jesus giving up all power, it's very difficult to, theologize it or abstract it too much. I just know that at the end of the day, the gospel is not that we apologize efficiently or appropriately enough, but that we have been forgiven.
Yeah. I can definitely theologize it. It's just like, I'm overwhelmed. Death is such a comfort. Like, that's like when I see like all of the sort of like gymnastics that we're going through right now to try to figure out like who's guilty and why and what is the power differential and what is Louis C.K. versus Garrison Keillor or whatever. It's like, I'm overwhelmed. Death is such a comfort. That's sort of
any kind of forgiveness is a miracle. Let's just see what happens. Well, the final piece today is the thing that you alluded to, RJ, and very kindly in relation to myself. It's called In Praise of Being Washed. It's written by Zach Barron and GQ. And I don't know, maybe it shows how washed I am that I never heard this term. So for those of you who never heard it either, here we go. This is what Zach writes. He says, it's not quite washed up. with its connotations of lounge singers in Vegas reflecting on their glory days. It's more about that transitive moment. There you are in the train station of life, waving goodbye to your edge and your youth as they depart. You are Eli Manning, and you are no longer a plausible NFL starter in the eyes of some, but you're not yet ready to go to the bench. People tend to use the word washed as a pejorative or as a mild self-deprecating admission of defeat. But I'm not so sure. I'm beginning to suspect the word describes something far more ecstatic. If you're anything like me, this is where it gets great. You spent the better part of your teens and 20s tirelessly working on being basically a more interesting version of yourself. You spent years building up something, taste, experience, judgment. You were trying to be like what you saw in the mirror, as all ambitious people try to do. What I am saying is perhaps you actually like that person now. Perhaps you could use the mirror less. And then he gives this incredible example of Roger Federer at the 2011 US Open after he had been beaten by Novak Djokovic. And it was like the beginning of sort of this valley that he went into. And now, of course, Wimbledon's on and he's the reigning badass again. But in the moment after that match is the moment when Federer became, quote unquote, washed. He modeled it for the rest of us. He didn't quit, but he let go of the idea of himself as perfection incarnate. He let go of the idea of himself entirely. After a decade of representing some abstractly infallible version of whatever it was he was trying to be, a pursuit that seemed to make him miserable, especially when he was young, he was just a man with a bad back and some talent that he was trying to make the best of. He stopped crying so much in post-match interviews. He raised one set of twins, then another. These days, he takes the spring off in order to rest for the summer. And then Barron finishes out by talking about all the Fridays of his life. He says, I think of all the dumb Fridays in my life. In high school, it was drugs. In college, alcohol. In 20s, well, let's not talk about what any of us did in our 20s. And now the dumb Fridays of my present arise in front of my windshield. All my flaws, my corny pastimes, the great things I've left undone and will never do. I listen to my golf clubs rattle gently in the trunk and am consumed with thoughts about how some other younger version of myself would be so terribly disappointed at what I've become. But what I mostly think is, damn, I wish I'd known about this earlier. I mean, I love that. There's kind of like there's a Rio Grace moment here. It's another thing of like rejoining Facebook after 9 years away. The people that were my contemporaries, I check on their pages and everyone's got a little more gray hair and it's looking a little more battered. And some people are looking great, but
they don't have kids, but yeah.
Like RJ basically.
Oh, well, I mean, he's aging in reverse, but yeah.
And you think like, there's that moment, maybe growing up is when you realize there's no longer endless potential and kind of who you are is who you're going to be. And that, you have this idea when you're a kid that life is going to get better and better, or you're going to become better and better. And, just like your times improve at swimming every single year, that's going to sort of be your moral trajectory as well. And then you get to this age where you're sort of like, well, this is probably it for me. And I'm kind of happy here. There's such a relief, there's such freedom in what you could only call freedom from the law of some kind. And it usually comes through some defeat or like Federer, hopefully it's not in front of millions of people. But I loved the grace with which this term washed, you can't help but think of it also in terms of in Jesus language and the washing of feet, the washing of baptism. And what's been washed from you is all the pretensions about the person you should be and needed to be, and all of a sudden who you are is there. And that's at the point when you actually experience anything remotely resembling love. But that's where I went with this. It really hit me between the eyes this week especially. What about you guys?
I mean, washed in the blood of the Lamb. That's all I can think. You know what I mean? My favorite church phrase from a rural church, actually an Alabama church, washed in the blood of the Lamb. Yeah, I actually keep thinking of my 4-year-old daughter as I'm reading this, which I know is strange, but she's such an interesting child. She's so kind and loving in a way that I find a little bewildering, to be honest with you. And we've recently asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. And she says every time, and she'll fill it out, if she's got to do it at school or whatever, that she wants to be a nurse. And there's this like thing in me of modernity that's like, you should want to be a doctor. And you know what I mean? Like this whole like narrative of like, but this has to be, you're a girl and you can do it, kind of thing. And I've like consciously not let myself do that. Cause I'm like, she could be a nurse. Like this could happen. Like she could love what she does. And like, I'm not, I'm trying not to ruin that for her, but cause I'll ruin other things for her, but I'm trying not to ruin that. But yeah, I mean, I thought washed in the blood of the lamb when I read this, because I don't know, there's a whole narrative as we age, more for women than for men, I think now, just because women are in so many ways more, it's more acceptable to celebrate women than it is men. And especially as we age, right? So it's like, 40 is the new 30, or like I have friends who just turned 50 and they're like, I can do whatever I want now, And I'm not quite sure, that doesn't appeal to me as much as the idea that I can, like, I don't have to think about myself as much. Do you know what I mean? That like whatever version of like golf clubs and like hanging out with people I love, like, is on the horizon for me sounds like pretty awesome. So
maybe it's podcasting, Sarah.
Maybe.
The first thing I wanted to say, I was just really impressed by the ease that Dave Zoll had telling sports stories. It was almost like you were a fan. I mean, Novak Djokovic just rolled off your tongue, Dave. I think you've probably been practicing that for a while. But
thanks, RJ. I appreciate that.
Welcome,
That's very sincere.
Yeah, I know you do.
Thank you, Benjamin Button.
Yeah. To the degree that I'm washed or not, it probably had something to do with like getting married fairly early and having kids fairly early. Like we got married at 23. I'd been 23 for a month. I was like 23 in 1 month when we got married. And we lived in the Bay Area for a little while in Oakland, and that was really fun. And then I got a job offer in New York City, which came with an apartment. We're like, oh, we're going to go to New York, and we're both going to be working. We're going to have disposable income. We're going to have free housing. Woo! It's going to be incredible. And then we've been there about 2 months, and my wife got the flu, quote unquote, which then lasted a lot longer than any flu should. And then we took a pregnancy test, and we're like, oh, I guess we're having kids now when we're 25. And I'm not saying you have to have kids to be washed, but I think it certainly helps, to just recognize. And I think if you want to be a good parent, it helps to be fairly washed. It helps to set aside your ambition and your sense of yourself. And that being said, I still wrestle with ambition, because I'm a person in the world. And like yesterday was July 4th, and I was looking forward to like a really kind of fun day. And then it just torrentially poured here for 4 or 5 hours. And I thought I might jump out of my skin. I was so stir crazy. And then I took a nap, which is about the most washed thing I could possibly do, I guess. And the day turned out okay. But I struggle with that. I will say when I really find myself getting tied up in knots by feeling like my life isn't what it should be, or I should be doing something different, or I'm falling behind, or whatever it is, then I will remind myself that, I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. It's going to be okay. I am loved. I will be taken care of. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. It may not be where I am forever, but that definitely, sort of the forced washing myself with those reminders helps me kind of make it through those times that I'm tempted into sort of ambitious anxiety or anxious ambition, whatever it may be. So,
yeah, I mean, I also think, I was wondering, for me, my faith is getting washed rather than I think a lot of people, or at least the more and more I read these narratives of, say, like deconstruction, or people, struggling with their faith or talking kind of ill about God, oftentimes what comes across to me is how much to them their faith was so much about improving and becoming their best self, even if it didn't, their best moral self, their best every kind of self. And that's not their fault. It's the church they grew up in. And it's sometimes we're so young when we hear those messages, we can't just argue our way out of them. We have to maybe just depart or something like that. But for me, Christianity was always like, you're washed. It's a huge relief. It was never anything but a relief and a comfort. I think a lot for some people, it becomes this scheme that's almost keeping that becomes a mode of ambition, like a spiritual moral ambition, rather than what happens after those ambitions fail. And the world that he's describing, I think, thrusts enough imperatives, law about what we need to be, who we need to be, look in the mirror, all this stuff. It become a much more interesting version of yourself. To me, and I think the church does that sometimes too in its own spiritualized way. But when he says, why can't we be washed at 22? And I was thinking, well, just become a Christian. But then I thought to myself, but that's not actually true, because a lot of people who become or have really strong faith at 22, just completely they get washed by that's what defeats them. And it becomes the mechanism of law. And even if they can say the 39 articles backward and forward. So, I feel very grateful that, to me, this idea that there's peace in sort of not, we can undertake projects, we can do exciting new things, we can record podcasts, we can throw conferences, but from a place of not really having to, and we're not going to take over the world, and that's more than okay. Let's just see what the Holy Spirit has in store, rather than it being like, I've got to live up to the call that God has given me or something like that.
That's the masthead of the quarterly, right? The TSLA quote, to care and not to care. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about being washed is you do care, but you don't let it define you. You don't let it enslave you. And I'm teaching on Mr. Rogers the next 2 weeks at church. And so I watched the movie and I've been watching a lot of videos, and I watched a commencement speech he gave at Dartmouth. There was one moment which was really good where he looked at the graduating class and said, remember, you never need to do anything remarkable in your life in order to be worthy of being loved. And I thought that was a pretty profound thing to say to people who are clearly incredibly high achievers, are probably at the least washed moment of their lives, about to embark on fabulous and exciting careers, and are probably thinking to themselves, what do I need to do to justify my existence and be worthy of acceptance by myself and others? And he looks at them and says, you don't have to do anything. You never need to do anything remarkable. And I found that very comforting.
It's amazing. I was at a wedding this past weekend, and the father of the bride gave this toast. I was really bracing myself for. He said, gets up there and says, everyone knows me as the advice guy. I was like, oh God, where are we going with this? But it's
never go to sleep angry. Yeah.
And he said, well, here are the three things I'd say I wish I'd known when I was about to get married. He said, firstly, throw out your list. I like to keep lists. Everyone likes to keep lists. My wife likes to keep lists. Throw them out. They don't do any good. And these are to kids who are very washed emotional and unwashed emotionally. Like, they're just totally excited about everything that even this sermon at the wedding was all about how their marriage is going to bring so much glory to God. And I just want to be like, oh gosh, because it's talking 5 years. But
maybe.
I hope so. I hope you also like each other. And his second thing was, he said, go to church every week together. And that could, but I was like, well, that's a very countercultural thing to say, even though these are all Christians here. But he said, because you need to be reminded of the gospel. That's what he said, that basically you need to be reminded that you are washed and you've been washed in like both senses of that word. And that, just two people kind of can relinquish a little bit of their prerogatives for 5 seconds and sit under something, a third party, especially if it's something related to grace and the gospel. And then third, he said, don't just laugh with each other, laugh at each other. And I left feeling like that was all I kind of needed to hear. It was really great. And I felt myself, that I was laughing at myself for expecting something that was going to be.
Did you find your life strengthened and your loyalty confirmed?
Oh, always.
So.
Can I tell you guys a grace and marriage story that we can cut?
Yeah.
So
sounds like we won't cut it.
So we were, I don't know, you might. So we were at the pool at Sewanee, and they have like a big university pool. And my kid wouldn't go off the diving board because it's like a scary diving board unless my husband did. So Josh got on the diving board, and it's like an Olympic diving board. So it bounced up and like put these massive cuts in the tops of his feet, which I have referred to as his stigmata for like weeks now, which he does not think is funny, and the kids don't know what I'm talking about, but it's a joke in my head. And he's had to re-bandage his feet. So he has these like giant Band-Aids. And like 2 mornings ago, I'm taking a shower, and I see like propped at the top of the shower is an old Band-Aid. It's like an old giant Band-Aid. And I'll be honest with you, like, I don't know, even 2 years ago, I probably would have been like, this is disgusting. Like, I would have cleaned it up and gotten mad, right? Probably. And like been like, that's so gross, like put it away or whatever. So what I did instead was I was like, I should clean that up. And then I got out of the shower and like forgot about it. And then I got downstairs and we're having coffee together. And I was like, hey, cause he'd just taken a shower. I said, hey, did you clean that Band-Aid up was in the shower. He's like, oh no, I keep forgetting about it. I was like, me too. I keep seeing it and being like, hey, that's super gross. And then I get out of the shower and brush my teeth and totally forget about it. And I know that sounds like not a grace, like a deep story, but it was this moment where it's like, we're both laughing at like our inability to like, I don't know, to like clean up a Band-Aid. We're both like together in this like sweet moment of like, we're going to laugh at who we are and like our expectations of one another. And, you know, I don't know. It's just.
Your marriage has been washed. Your marriage.
Exactly. We've given up.
And now it begins. Now it begins.
With our stigmata Band-Aids. All right.
I love that. Any parting shots from you guys before we say goodbye for a couple of weeks?
Good to be back. Missed you guys.
Missed you, Arj. Give us your sum up the Mr. Rogers documentary for us.
I cried a lot. So much. Just obviously the power of unconditional love, the power of empathy, his belief that the most important thing he could possibly do is get people comfortable with sort of talking about their feelings and being vulnerable. I think the way, can anything good come out of Nazareth? The way they talked about his childhood, being functionally the only child of wealthy parents who just told him to grow up all the time and never listened to him or paid attention to him, and how he was actually overweight in his adolescence and was pretty brutally bullied because of it, but how that turned into this incredible compassion for children. Again, what I said before early in the episode, the incredible power of vulnerability, honesty, talking about your weakness, empathy for other people, all the sorts of things that the world will tell you not to ever do because you will get killed. And you will get killed, probably. But you'll also be a human being. Is it Gerhard Forde who says that what God wants to do is take us unhappy little gods and make us into true humans? And I look at Fred Rogers and he seems like a true human being. And the fact that he was exactly the same, off camera as on camera. So it was and you could tell his boys loved him too. His sons loved him. His wife loved him. A life pretty well led, and yet not a life without struggle. That he had his doubts and his insecurities to the very end. He was a human being just like the rest of us. So if you have not seen it, go and see it. I'm going to definitely buy it when it comes out and watch it when I need a good cry, or just to be reminded of what actually matters.
Say that Ferde again. God takes.
Yeah, that God wants to take us unhappy little gods and make us into true humans. Which is he wants to wash us. That's what we've been talking about the entire time. He wants to sort of put our ambitious selves to death in order that we might be free, happy, hopeful, trusting human beings.
Let's end there. Thank you guys. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.
Praise the Lord.